Joe Rogan literally killing musicians?
Do I mean literally or figuratively? It's probably what you're asking yourself. I'm about to explain everything, and what you hear might be shocking. So let's get started.
Subscribe.
Perfect.
Yo, it's Blue Hair Dave here. First off, let me just say there's been a shortage of hitting the like button, so please go ahead and hit the like button. And if you like these types of videos with information about working from home and people who are self-employed and entrepreneurs, please subscribe to my channel and hit the bell so that you get a notification every time I have a video which comes up, and I do them very frequently. Let's get on with our news story. If you haven't heard already, Joe Rogan joined Spotify for an exclusive deal worth $100 million. The terms still aren't completely clear about how long that is going to be, but we do know that he's going to start pulling videos off of YouTube and have them only on Spotify, and Spotify is putting a big focus on podcasts. This is a huge news story, not just for the podcasting industry, but also the music industry. Besides hurting their competitors with this new deal, places like iTunes and places that stream podcasts, Joe Rogan is one of the top one or two listed podcasts for streaming, downloads, and listenership and viewership. So this is a really big deal for Spotify. But how is this going to affect the rest of the industry? Let me explain. In this day and age, musicians rely on Spotify to get listeners. People don't buy many albums or CDs, and they listen on a downloadable system that streams music just like Spotify and iTunes. They receive royalties or some money back when these are played. So instead of having record sales, the alternative now is you get streams. This can be great for smaller bands. It can be great for really big bands, but all the musicians in the middle, they get squeezed. Let me explain. Spotify divides the revenues per stream and income that come in from ad dollars and also premium members. Premium members are people who pay for the service per month so that they don't have any advertisements. Streams by premium members pay a little bit more than the people who have the free service. The more listeners, the better it is for everyone. However, the top tier people grab a bigger slice of the pie that's divided. So when somebody big comes along, like Joe Rogan, who has a ton of downloads and streams, they get a much larger portion of that pizza. You see, there's only one pizza pie to go around, and your percentage is based on the number of streams you have compared to all of the streams. So mid-level and smaller musicians will take a big hit. Now, really small musicians, they love to have streaming services because they can get in front of a lot of people really quickly. But mid-level musicians who get a lot of streams, these are touring bands and touring acts and people that are professional musicians, they will get a smaller piece of the pie. So in essence, Joe Rogan will be taking a higher percentage from all the other people that are on Spotify. That includes the other podcasters and musicians. Unless, of course, Joe Rogan's being on Spotify increases the amount of listeners proportionate to the amount that he's taking, which is why Spotify probably did the contract in the first place, imagining that this will occur.
But will it?
But in order to recoup the cost of acquiring just the rights to have Rogan on Spotify exclusively, you would need to get around 26 billion streams. And I'm sure they expect to get that eventually. But if somebody's on there getting 26 billion streams, the person who's getting 2 million streams is going to get paid less. This was brought to my attention by one of my subscribers on YouTube. This person is a musician, and they pointed out the amount that they're going to get paid is going to go down dramatically. And so since Spotify pays the artists the way you would divide a pizza, except the person who has the most people eating the pizza get more of the pizza, leaves a really tiny little slice for the mid-level musicians. But there's another worrisome problem for musicians on Spotify. Spotify seems to be focusing more on podcasts, and this contract kind of says it all, besides the other acquisitions that Spotify has made recently, gobbling up other podcast companies. As Spotify is focusing on promoting podcasts, that means less listening time for musicians. That means less music in general, more audible and listening like podcasts for spoken word. And this indeed has shown out in the numbers already. There's already evidence that shows that podcasts are cannibalizing music streams. A US study by NPR and Edison Research published last year suggested the growth of spoken word audio podcasts is indeed eating into that precious time for tunes. So people are listening less to music and more to things like audiobooks and podcasts. There was also a recent survey that showed there used to be an 80-20 split between music and podcasts, and then 4 years later that had changed to 76 and 24%. And podcast listening has really blossomed over the last year or so. As of May 2020, there are over 1 million podcasts and over 29 million episodes. If you want to hear a really cool podcast about entrepreneurship, check out Success Layers. There seems to be a battle brewing for listening and learning, or just listening to people speak is taking a huge chunk of where music used to live in our heads. Working out, running, at the job, in the car. Now many of us decide whether we're going to listen to a podcast, an audiobook, or music. So you're probably asking, but Dave, how does this translate into actually killing musicians? Do you mean you're going to kill music? No, you're not going to kill music. Do you mean you're going to kill musicians' jobs? Maybe. Probably. Do you mean that this is actually going to kill musicians? There's a real good chance of that. And here's why. Now, it might be a stretch to say that this is actually physically going to kill some musicians, or many musicians for that matter, but it's certainly not going to help people that are already on the fringe earn a better living. Their royalties will almost certainly go down in all probability even further than they were before, which was already pretty low compared to what they were doing 15 years ago. Now, this leaves musicians who never changed their business plan or game plan when streaming became popular to the freemium model of using streaming services in order to get interest in their music and then monetizing the music through other means such as vinyl sales and specialty pressing of their music sales, and then also behind the scenes internet access to what the musicians and the artists are all doing. You can sell t-shirts, memorabilia, and streaming was a great way to get in front of people that might not have ever heard your music before. A lot of musicians, especially folks who have been around the game for a while, were stuck to the old model where they tried to count on selling actual units of music sold to make a living. So if you don't have your music in commercials or being licensed out and you're just on streaming, you're probably not selling a lot of albums or records or physical items. Now let me give you some stats on what Spotify does actually pay out. So Spotify pays a high end, let me look this up, 0.00437 per stream. That equals to $4.37 per 1,000 streams. Now imagine that. You have 1,000 people that wanted to listen to your music and they did, and you only made $4.37. Yikes. So you could get 2 million streams, which would be considered a pretty big success. I know I'd enjoy 2 million streams. That's 2 million people that listened to your music, your art. And you would only make about $12,000 from that. Unless you found alternative ways, like I just discussed, to monetize your music and the access you give people to your writing style and what you do behind the scenes. This leaves the vast majority of music on Spotify paying well under minimum wage, making musicians a group of people that are always just about hanging on. Now, how do I know this? Well, as you can see in the background, my hobby and my first love before digital marketing and creating informative videos such as this, by the way, hit the like button and subscribe if you haven't already, was playing, recording, and writing music. So this is pretty close to my heart. Musicians are usually a group of people that have big brains, big hearts, and small wallets. There are often problems paying for rent, for food, for healthcare, any kind of insurance whatsoever. Now, take into account that Spotify decides how much you get paid on how well your competitors are doing. The more you get streams, the bigger your slices of the pie are. But the pie doesn't necessarily get bigger. It's the same pie in general, but the big wigs get to take almost all of it. This is an interesting pay model for an industry which usually isn't very competitive. Nobody's trying to out-art the other person to make more money. So it's an intriguing imbalance, to say the least. So when a big fish comes in like Joe Rogan with gigantic amounts of streams daily, he's going to grab a much larger portion of this pie. And everyone else will actually get less. Whereas I often talk about in some of my other videos how the world and business in general is not a zero-sum game. You can create wealth. You can make money out of nowhere. It's not like if you make $10, somebody else does not make $10. That's not how economies work. They grow. It's not a zero-sum game. Spotify and the streaming ecosystem is a zero-sum game. If there's $100 to get spent, whoever's streaming the most gets the higher percentage of that $100. Now take the lack of live shows recently from the pandemic and add to it a huge cut in royalties for musicians from their main source of royalty income, and you could have a financial disaster even further exacerbated for all musicians worldwide. Many of the jobs musicians also hold to help cover expenses, such as in the service industry, are also now gone, and they might not come back. And this adds to the misery. And now you have a group of people who are already borderline having trouble make ends meet, and now they have a catastrophic loss of income from one artist's contract pushing their incomes lower, which would be enough to push them further below the poverty line. Many of these people already do not have access to healthcare from the results of poverty, lack of access to healthcare, little hopes of resurrection that could lead to sickness, despair, hunger, depression, yes, even death and suicide. I'm talking to you, Morrissey. Hold in there. Now, is Joe Rogan to blame for this? Is Spotify to blame for this possible or even probable outcome? And now remember, we're just using best guesses on how the contract is. We don't know for sure that Rogan's even going to get royalties. They might have just paid him the $100 million flat out. But from the musicians I'm hearing from that rely on Spotify money, this is what I'm hearing. They're worried that their incomes are going to be reduced 50% to 90%. So these are just my thoughts, and I don't want to preface this and post-preface or whatever the word would be for this to say that I don't know for sure that this is what's going to shake out because it's too early to say. But the reports I'm reading from industry insiders and people who are commenting on my videos, this is what everyone's worried about. Now, to put this in perspective, I want to leave with some quotes from some music industry insiders. Now, I'll quote, Joe Rogan just got paid the equivalent value of over 26 billion streams for a podcast license. This is from Tom Gray. He's the director of royalties, Music Copyright and Licensing Society, PRS for music. 26 billion streams for a podcast license. So essentially, a musician, this is a quote, a musician would need to generate 23 billion streams on Spotify to earn what they're paying Joe Rogan for his podcast rights. That's from a music writer named Ted Goya. He also suggested that this means Spotify values Rogan more than any musician in the history of the world, monetarily at least. So, will some musicians actually die from having less income from Spotify and their royalties because one big player came in and grabbed a much bigger piece of the pie? Time will tell. I don't know the answer to that, but I sure hope not. I also have to add that I'm a Joe Rogan podcast fan and watch it, and I'll continue to watch it on Spotify. So I hope that Spotify figures out a more fair way to pay all their artists. Because I also like Spotify. So don't forget to like and subscribe and check out for my new videos. This is Blue Hair Dave, and I'm out.